Take 2 of this video. Hi guys, and welcome back to Bookish Chaos. I am Shay, and today we will be talking about Crossed by Emily McIntire. Now, for those of you who've never heard of Emily McIntire, she does retellings of sometimes Disney things, sometimes just, we're going to skip that. She does bookish retellings. So she takes a story and changes it and makes it her own. Now, before I go into her books, we are only talking in depth about Crossed today, but I adore her writing. I think she is a wonderful author. I love most of her books. So, because I can never remember what the third one is called, it's just the way that my brain works. We're going to use the tablet for a little bit. Okay, so her first book is Hooked, which is obviously a Peter Pan retelling. Her second book is Scarred, which is obviously a Lion King retelling. It is very good. They are obviously humans, not lions. I think there's a spider on my wall. Anyway, the third book is Twisted, which is an Aladdin retelling. And for some reason, I never remember what this book is called. So after Twisted, we have Wretched, or as I say, Wretched, which is Wizard of Oz. It's a Wizard of Oz retelling. And then we have Crossed, which is Hunchback of Notre Dame. And then I don't know for sure if it's out or not, or if it's coming out this year. It will be out this year at some point if it's not already out. And that is Hexed, which is going to be a Little Mermaid retelling. So I'm going to give like a short thing about all of them except for Crossed because I just did that one and we're going to dive really deep into it. So Hooked is very good. Peter Pan, Captain Hook, love it. Wonderful. Scarred, imagine like a Mufasa and a Scar type of people. Amazing. Probably my favorite one because I love the Scar character in that book. Loved him so much. Twisted was fine. I read it. It was not as good. Like, I think Scarred ruined me for all the rest of her books because I just loved it so much. It was wonderful. And then Wretched or Wretched. I love her writing. I think I already said that. She is an amazing author. I hated this book. I hated this book because the female main character has zero redeeming qualities, and I hate her with every bone in my body, and I wanted her to be murdered at the end of this book. But Emily McIntire writes HEAs, happily ever afters. So she did get her happily ever after, but I hate her. I hate her so much. And then we have Crossed, which I did not like the main male character. The MMC was annoying, self-righteous, and I wanted to throttle him constantly. I started this book on audio, and I think it might have been the narrator. The narrator did an amazing job of portraying who I pictured this guy as, but I hate him. So when I switched to reading it on Kindle Unlimited with my eyeballs and not my ears, I made it through it a lot easier because I was hearing him in my voice and not in the narrator's voice, who I feel like did an amazing job. I'm not knocking the ability of the narrator. I just really hated Cade, who is our main character of Crossed, our male main character. I hated him so much to start out with. I love him by the end of it, which did not happen with the female main character in Wretched because I hated her and I still to this day hate her and I don't want her to have anything good in her life. But we are not here to talk about that book. We are here to talk about Crossed. I mean, if you really, really wanted to hear me rant about how much I hated her, I could suffer through doing that book again. But that would take me a while and it would be like a next year project. Anyway, okay. And then Hexed is going to be a Little Mermaid retelling. I have not read it. I don't even know if it's out yet. I will be reading it because I really do enjoy her writing. Okay, there are trigger warnings for every single one of Emily McIntire's books. Please read them before you read them. The trigger warnings for this book are explicit sexual scenes, religious trauma, self-harm, graphic torture, gore, violence, and murder. I would also add on here mentions of sexual assault, implied sexual assault. Also, mentions of harm to animals. How do I want to word this? Terrible things being said about a boy who has autism spectrum disorder. And I think that's it for right now. Back to the video. We open, and this book is set in Vermont, in a made-up town called Festivale. And our male main character is Cade. He is a murderous priest who feels like he needs to cleanse the sins of the earth by killing people. This is a Hunchback of Notre Dame retelling, as I said, so I feel like he is Claude, the evil priest guy who, like, if you've never seen the Hunchback of Notre Dame, I'm about to ruin it for you, but this movie came out in, like, the 90s, so I'm sorry, not sorry. I feel like he is Claude, who is the old evil priest guy who, like, wants to murder Esmeralda, but is nice to Quasimodo. I was like, what is the Hunchback's name? Quasimodo. He's nice to Quasimodo, who lives in, the church and hangs out in the bell tower and all that fun stuff. But he hates Esmeralda and he wants to murder her because she's a gypsy, which is terrible. I will not even today get into the prejudices against the Romani people, but just know that they exist. And The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a very good movie to explore the prejudices against the Romani people in an animated child story if you know the context. But the difference is Cade is young and hot and not old and hideous like Claude is. He likes Silas in the Da Vinci Code, engages in corporal mortification on himself, only instead of the spiked chain on the thigh thing, he has a whip, which he named Discipline, which I'm super into. He states that he has a monster in him that makes him violent towards sinners. And our female main character is Amaya. She has a brother named Quentin who is autistic. It does not straight come out and say that he is autistic, but if you know anything about how the autism spectrum works and autism spectrum disorder, you can gather that that is the case. She never comes right out. I don't remember, but I don't think she comes out and says he's autistic. But she takes care of her brother because their shitty mom left them. And so since she was like 17, she's been taking care of her brother. They are like the town outcasts, even when their mom was around. So Amaya is a stripper who enjoys the feeling of power it gives her as a person who cannot control literally anything else about her life. So we open, and this book is set in Vermont, in a made-up town called Festivale. And our male main character is Cade. He is a murderous priest who feels like he needs to cleanse the sins of the earth by killing people. This is a Hunchback of Notre Dame retelling, as I said, so I feel like he is Claude, the evil priest guy who, like, if you've never seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I'm about to ruin it for you, but this movie came out in, like, the 90s, so I'm sorry, not sorry. I feel like he is Claude, who is the old evil priest guy who, like, wants to murder Esmeralda, but is nice to Quasimodo. I was like, what is the Hunchback's name? Quasimodo. He's nice to Quasimodo, who lives in, the church and hangs out in the bell tower and all that fun stuff. But he hates Esmeralda and he wants to murder her because she's a gypsy, which is terrible. I will not even today get into the prejudices against the Romani people, but just know that they exist. And The Hunchback of Notre Dame is a very good. She could not control that her mom was an awful person who hated her. She could not control that her brother was born with these limitations from being on the spectrum. She could not control the fact that her shitty mom left her and her brother, which I'm just going to say, I feel like even though they go through so many shitty things, they were better off without this woman. Chantel, I hate her. I hate her so much. Okay, so we open on Cade craving something when he goes for a walk, and then he meets a sex worker and he unalives her because, sinner. We go through his monologuing about the monster and how he has no choice but to do what the monster wants, and I don't care. Skip to the next chapter. We get Amaya. And it opens on her brother getting beat up, and we learn that her mother's shitty boyfriend was trafficking the mom. And then the mom left the kids. And Parker, the shitty ex-boyfriend of her mom, worms his way in with Amaya, and we get a little bit of how she tries to deal with this. He's that rich guy who does shitty things because he knows he can get away with it. He's a terrible person. If he did the things that he does and he wasn't a rich man, he would be caught, he would be in jail for life. Next, we go back to Cade, and Parker, aka the mom's shitty ex, comes in and starts ordering Cade around in the rectory of the church. And it doesn't end well for Parker because Cade is not going to put up with his bullshit, and he basically tells him to GTFO out of the rectory. This does trigger a memory for Cade of a mean nun beating him, and you learn that he grew up in I don't think we learned quite this moment, but he grew up in a monastery with a terrible nun who could see the demon inside of him, the violent tendencies that he struggles with, and she was like, God wants me to beat it out of you. So that's what she did. Next chapter, we go to Amaya, and she is going to her club to work, which is ironically enough called the Chapel, which is fabulous and wonderful, and I love it. She tells us more about how dancing gives her the power that she lacks in the rest of her life. And we learn that her shitty mom, I literally only ever have her in my notes as her shitty mom until we get to a later point where we actually find out what happened to her shitty mom. So, shitty mom, her name is Chantel, but shitty mom. How when Amaya started to grow up and be older, her shitty mom was jealous of her beauty. And her mom abandoned them when she was 19. So she says, similar to religion, her mom's patterns never changed, which kind of foreshadows. I mean, you obviously, if you read these kinds of books, you obviously know that Amaya and Cade are interests, possibly. He's not as shitty as Parker to her, things like that. But the parallel to religion and her mother both never changing, where Cade is a priest, is a little So I wrote, I love how much pole means to her. And obvi, her stage name is Esmeralda, because this is a Hunchback of Notre Dame retelling. So she's dancing and she sees like a dark stranger in the background, and she feels like the heat of his gaze watching her. And we're like, obviously, you're like, that's Cade. That's got to be Cade. Dark stranger, hidden. But she doesn't have time to dwell on that because she sees Parker, and she intentionally dances in a place, like a different town, so that she doesn't run into Parker. And here's Parker. But I mean, the town is like 20 miles away, so it's not like he wouldn't be like, ooh, I like the strip club better. So she's dancing, and she has no choice but to finish her dance because she's on stage, which, if you know anything about stripping or exotic dancing, whatever the appropriate term is, when you go on stage, you go on stage for like a set amount of time, dancing to like whatever. And it's like really not okay to leave the stage in the middle of your song, like in the middle of your set. I don't know what it's called. I suppose I have someone I could ask, but that's for a whole nother thing. So she finishes dancing, and she hopes that he doesn't see her. So he doesn't see her, and she's able to escape and get off. She starts thinking about Parker and why she's so afraid of him, and trigger warning for discussion of harm to animals and SA all in one sentence. This is where we learn that after her mom left, in retaliation for her mom leaving because he was pimping her out, he dismembered their cat and then raped her as a way to gain control over her, like fear tactic shit. So that right there tells you that Parker is a terrible fucking person. So she escapes off of the stage, and then we are back to Cade's POV, which at this point I hate dealing with. He is at her club because he was stalking Parker. And then we get a Cade monologue about how all the people are lost souls, blah, blah, blah. And then he sees Amaya. And I put on here, at this point, I wrote, I predict he's going to stop her from dancing since she's the first girl he's been attracted to in I don't know how long. Or should I say tempted by, because he is a pious man who is supposed to be celibate, but he sees her dancing on stage while he's the stranger in the dark corner and is like, oh my God, this girl is blah, 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 blah. He's French, by the way. I did not mention that. His name is Cade Frederic. Frederic. I'm not French. I'm not good at French. So he sees her look at Parker in obvious terror, but he thinks it's a look of want, probably because, he is a priest and he was raised in a monastery by an evil nun. So the idea of reading body language and knowing the difference between a look of terror and a look of want are clearly things that he did not learn how to do as before a priest child. So he follows her and he finds her, and we go into his head, his thoughts of how he could fuck her mouth right now. He talks about how his back is sore from his atonement with discipline. And I, as a person who is not a Christian but doesn't necessarily not believe in the Christian God, don't understand the mentality that you have to be in to think that atoning for sins in that way is a thing that you should do, or if that is actually how Sky Daddy God wants his followers to be. I don't understand the want to follow that. So we're just going to go with that. We are not going to, this is not a religion channel, but definitely not. We're not going into my beliefs or anything like that today. Probably ever. So he begins to talk to her, and he is rude to her for no fucking reason other than he is like, you're a sinner, so fuck you, and I hate it. So she responds with, you're French, and he says, oui. I put on my notes, Sir Pretentious over here. And then he stalks her to her house the whole way, spouting about how she's a sinner and there's a demon in her and he needs to kill her. So maybe it's his job to snuff out the demon inside of her. More monologuing. And did I mention how much I hate being in his head? Because I hate being in his head. We learn that he became a priest because of a nice priest who took him in and, quote, taught him to be a better man. The priest got gained his trust and took him in because he eventually had enough of being beat by the nun as a child. So he ran away at 7 years old to live on the street. And then this priest who was nice took him in, and because of that, he became a priest. Like, he was a literal small child when she started beating him. So, like, no wonder he's such a dickhead. But as in his words, the church offered him warmth, food, and purpose. And I did like this description of how he feels about Amaya, aka at this point Esmeralda. That's all he knows her as. And right now, I am not a worthy man, not when I'm neck deep in black waters, wading through this obsession that's reached out and wrapped itself around my neck like a noose, choking me until I can't suck in air. Esmeralda. After he stalks her to her house, he immediately goes to his office and jerks off, which is not something that we needed to see. As much as it made me hate my life to watch the scene, to listen to this scene, the words didn't suck. So congratulations, Emily McIntire, on not writing the scene in a way that makes me want to gouge out my eyes, like the word folds or slit. We've talked about this. Anyway, his climax was, as he says, dirty, depraved, incredible. And from the book, my vision goes black, comes spreading out forcefully, landing across a few papers, and the calendar that marks my responsibilities to the church, to which I audibly screamed, "Not the calendar!" And then, oh no, the desire is not gone. It's only burrowed in further, purring like a cat, creating a hum that vibrates through my chest. I really do love Emily McIntire's writing. That is a perfect example of the way that she describes things that I actually really love. So, of course, she's the problem, not him, not his beliefs, not the things that he deems inappropriate. We get more woe is him monologue and more supplication to Sky Daddy after like a whole mental breakdown. And then my vertebrae slotting into place with purpose. Does that mean he stands up and his whole vertebrae like slots into place? So he's obviously like kneeled down using discipline on himself. And then he sits up. Was he leaned forward? Was he in like downward dog slapping him? I don't know. So his vertebrae slots in place as he stands up, I guess. My cock shamefully hardening as my mind and body buzz from the pain. So he's a masochist, which we don't hate. I mean, good for you, my dude. Yums, whatever yums your yuck. No, I'm not going to yuck somebody's yum. So whatever floats your boat, my guy, I guess. So that chapter's over. We're back to Amaya talking about how her mother made them go to church on Sundays and more parallels of how her mom and religion never change. And we learn more about her mom, about how her mom sucks. And she doesn't want to be a mother to either Amaya or her brother, and how she used to not argue with her mom due to the fact that her mom used to throw things when she was angry. So, in addition to her mom not caring about her daughter and being jealous of her child because she is a selfish person, she also used to be violent when she'd get angry. So that's super fun. It never expressly says that she used to hurt the children, but still, throwing things does cause trauma. It does cause things that you have to work through as an adult. It's just the way it is. So we get a flashback, and she is walking her brother to a doctor's appointment, and she sees Parker and some woman going at it in the alley, like making out. I don't think they were doing it. And she sees that it's a woman from church and her mother's friend, whose name is Florence, who for the rest of these notes I will be referring to as Flo, because I bet she would hate it, and I really hate this woman. So she decides not to tell her mom because fuck her mom. And a few days later, Parker sneaks into her bedroom in the middle of the night and covers her mouth and tells her to be quiet about what she saw. And he then threatens her with sexual assault because he's a gropey and gross person. He also threatens her more to kill her mom and grape her while her mom, like slit her mom's throat and then assault her while her mother dies in front of her. So that's the kind of disgusting man that we are dealing with. She talks about her mom disappearing again, and at this point, I was like, maybe Parker killed her. Maybe she thinks that her mom ran away, but maybe Parker killed her just so that he could get to Amaya, because that seems like the kind of thing that he would do. We also learned that Parker is the mayor's best friend, and that Parker is partially responsible for the mayor getting his job, so that doesn't bode well for this town of Festivale that we live in. We also learned that Parker thinks she makes money by doing at-home data entry work, and he does not know that she is a dancer at the chapel. And then we get that Parker is also a hot guy, so a cool, hot, disgusting man, which we have already established. I'm really glad that Emily McIntire doesn't make all horrible men ugly and fat like some authors do. Like, the only way that they can show you that they're bad men is to attack their looks, which is really shallow and not a good way of describing what humans are actually like, because not every horrible human in real life is fat and ugly. Sometimes they are super attractive. A lot of the times they're super attractive, and that's how they get away with the things that they do, because you can people tend to look past it or not believe that they could be those kind of people because of the way that they look. So we get Parker trying to talk her into being his again, and she admits that she doesn't think she could afford what it would cost her, which I agree. And he uses her brother to try to control her, saying he could pay to put him in a private school that would be good for his level of care that he needs. And then the mask, of course, as it always does, drops when she starts to reject him, and he immediately is like, all right, then where's my money? And we learn that basically every penny that she makes working at the chapel goes to Parker. So they're living in abject poverty even though she has a job that could make her a lot of money. Dancing is a thing that she's always done, so she's very good at it. And she likes the way the power it gives her. Therefore, we can also assume that she's an attractive woman. And being able to slip into that persona and become a whole different person, she could be someone who's very good at it. She should theoretically be making a fuck ton of money. But Parker takes it all because Parker sucks. Next, we are back in Cade's POV. It is obviously most of the time it switches back and forth every single chapter. Sometimes we get multiple chapters of someone in a row. Father Jeremiah is in the room with him, who is just like another priest at the place. Cade gets brought in to run the church, which I don't think I mentioned, but it's like Little Notre Dame. So they refer to this specific church just as Notre Dame, even though it's not like the Notre Dame from like France or wherever Notre Dame is, because it is a Hunchback of Notre Dame retelling. So he notes that Jeremiah has the eyes and the cast of his face of a person who's never experienced trauma. He is an innocent soul. They are in a car headed to a place where the Carmelite nuns used to live in seclusion. And so we get some conversation and some world building on the car ride. They're talking about ages. And Kate says 36 isn't that young. And in my notes, I wrote, "My good sir, I am blank years old and I feel very young." And I aged myself up 2 years because I wrote, "My good sir, I am 34 and I feel very young." I am not 34. I literally just turned 32. My husband is 34. I am not 34. Good Lord. So he asked Jeremiah about Parker, and we learned that Parker is very good at the front-facing kindness. He talks him up about how his friend how he got his friend elected, and he gives to charity, and he keeps the old buildings from being torn down, and he gives to the parish. And so far, Emily is doing a very good job at talking about people who can be like Parker and wealthy and outwardly good while being abhorrent in private. So we get to the monastery and we meet Sister Genevieve, and we learn she is the only nun currently living at this monastery. This monastery is on some peaceful, lush land. And I love the way that she describes things, she being Emily McIntire, because it makes it easy for people like me who can picture things and like create a movie in our minds from words. It makes it easy to like play out a movie while I'm reading, which is part of why I can lose myself in books, even if the writing is bad, even if the plot has massive plot holes. I can create it like a movie so I feel and I live these characters. So it's easy for me to not always be the person who's going to be able to look at a piece of literature critically all the time, because I lose myself in reading, and it is very hard for things to pull me out of the world, no matter how poorly written and created the world is. Kate says he can tell that Sister Genevieve has a darkness within her, and he notices from her body language that she is nervous while going through this line of questioning that he's putting her under, and she keeps glancing towards the stairs behind her, so she's clearly hiding something. She tries to pass it off just as nervousness to have people here, and I'm going to spoil this right now. We never find out why she keeps staring at the stairs, unless it's like she wants to escape, so she's looking at her escape. Other than that, we never get any, like, I was like, there's someone up them stairs, but as far as we know, there's not. So we're back to Amaya. She's with her friend Dahlia, who watches Quentin. I don't know if this is the first time I've ever said that her little brother's name is Quentin, or referred to sometimes as Quinn, but that's her little brother's name. When she goes to work, Dahlia stays with him. She asks if Dahlia misses being a dancer, and Dahlia says sure, but no one can dance forever. We learn that Dahlia was in a car accident, that she was hit by a drunk driver, and it fucked up her leg, so she can't be a dancer anymore. So Dahlia lives with Amaya and Quinn and watches him when Amaya goes to work. We had our thoughts about how she can't tell Dahlia that she doesn't have the luxury of putting away savings, because Dahlia is like bringing up the idea of savings. Because Parker takes everything that she makes. Dahlia does not know about her dealings with Parker other than that Parker wants her to be his. That's about the extent of what Dahlia knows about her and Parker's relationship. Dahlia tells her that she needs to tell her something about Candace, who is Dahlia's cousin, and she was an addict. And I wrote, and oh my God, she is the addict that Cade strangled at the beginning of the book. So I guess she was an addict, not a dancer. I'll have to, I don't, my notes jump all over the place. When I started my notes, I was like further into the book, so I just assumed that she was also an exotic dancer, but she's not. She was just an addict. We're back to Cade talking. He's taking confession before everyone takes communion tomorrow. And he's listening to people when someone new comes in, and it is Amaya, and he calls her Petite Pécheur, which, pardon my French, means little sinner. And the way that I want Petite Pécheur tattooed on my body, somewhere visible. So when someone says, "What does that mean?" I can be like, "Little sinner." I want that tattooed on my body so bad. So he asks her name, and now he knows that her real name is Amaya, and that's super dangerous for her, but I guess it is what it is. And they do confession, and it's gross because his dick gets hard while he's thinking about how she's such a sinner. And so he asks her what she does for a living, and she tells him that she strips to make a living and says, which I don't think is a sin, because on this channel we don't shame sex work, it is not fucking sin. But obviously, he thinks she's wrong. He, in his mind, says that her dancing will create enough sin to overflow the streets with sin. He says, "I want to lash out to say that anyone seeing her body but me will ensure their death." But he doesn't, because that would be ridiculous, because he's a priest, and who the fuck is he? He spews on about how the kingdom of heaven, and she states that she doesn't know if she wants to be in God's kingdom. And that there isn't anything wrong with her lifestyle because she pays off her mother's debts, and that makes her feel more dirty than stripping ever could. Kate asks what debts, and as she should, she asks if all priests are this pushy. She then runs from the confessional booth because she has had enough of this shit. And as she walks out, Jeremiah asks Cade what was she doing here. And Kate is like, "Well, do you know her?" And Jeremiah's like, "Yeah, her mother used to date Parker, and that's how I know her. And I saw her and her mom having a fight one time, and her mom called her a witch and said that she bewitched the whole town." And Jeremiah thinks that Amaya is the reason the town has gone downhill, that everything's gotten worse in town since they shut up. Or like Parker just making things worse. But we'll blame, the strange new people and the girl that is a stripper. And Jeremiah says that the only reason that they haven't been run out of town is because Parker wouldn't allow it. Next chapter, still in Cade's POV. Please shoot me in the head at this point in the book. It opens with Cade thinking about Amaya, of course, and noticing that his thoughts of her are slipping into his teachings, and he also thinks, okay, so I'll just have to kill her, and then everything will be okay. The way that he bounces back and forth between, do I need to kill her or do I not need to kill her? Do I want to kill her or do I want to have sex with her? Makes me want to shoot him in the head. He begins to wonder what she's doing, and he leaves the church to head to her work because he's thinking, I'm going to kill her tonight. The thought is quite erotic. He takes the bus to the other town, and he's thinking about how he currently has anonymity due to the fact that he hasn't given mass yet. But after tomorrow, he will be giving his first mass tomorrow, and all of his anonymity will be gone. We're going to stop here and be like, why the fuck are you riding a bus? Because, my guy, you have a car. Later on in the book, you have a car. Why are you taking the bus? I mean, maybe to be like discreet so his car wasn't seen elsewhere when people figure out who he is. But still, at this point, he's still anonymous. He could park his car like 5 blocks down and still walk to the chapel to go stalk her. Anyway, it's not important. When he gets there, he sees her and he gets filled with rage watching her leave the floor with the client, and he decides to follow them and be creepy. He slides the velvet cover for the door open enough for him to see what is going on. He watches her giving a lap dance, and he thinks how angry he is that it isn't him that she's dancing on. He's staring at them, and he notices that the man has a wedding band on his finger, and he, of course, gets caught eye-fucking Amaya dancing on this dude, and the guy escorts him out the side door to the alley. He tries to convince himself that he is just waiting in the alley to kill her, but then he follows her home and watches her peeping through her window like a creep. He returns home and, of course, uses discipline on himself. If we can remember, this is what he named his whip, which I don't hate. I don't hate that he named his whip discipline. Like, I would name a whip discipline anyway. This is why I record when my husband's not here, because he would be like, excuse me, ma'am, uh, this is a Wendy's. And then the chapter ends with him praying to God. And again, I have to give Emily McIntire her due. As he is dressing for Mass the next morning, he names all of the pieces of his clothing and adds in the Latin prayer that needs to be prayed over the communion, which in English translates to may the body of our Lord Jesus Christ preserve your soul unto life everlasting, which in the Catholic faith would be done in Latin. I mean, not everywhere, because there are a lot of Catholic church nowadays that have gone away from have gone away from Latin as their main conversation thing. We switch to Amaya. They are at the grocery store, and Quentin almost runs into Flo, the friend of her mom, who was fucking Parker, who we hate. And Flo tells Amaya that she needs to keep Quentin under control or he shouldn't be let into public places. And like I said, the trigger warning about terrible things being said to and about people, or in this case, a child on the spectrum. She then puts herself in Amaya's way when Amaya tries to walk away from her and threatens her with getting Quinn kicked out of school, even though he's the one being bullied at school. We get a flashback of them being in church, and baby Quentin is crying in church. Parker glares at him, and her mom sends her out with the baby because, she can't be bothered to take care of her own children. And while she's out there, Parker appears behind her, startling her when he speaks, and he violates her with his eyes. And then her mom appears and, of course, thinks Amaya was being inappropriate, even though Parker is the only one being inappropriate. So then her mom stops her when they get outside and walks over to Florence and Parker and starts yelling at Florence. Florence looks at Amaya and says, "You told her?" And Amaya's like, "No," but Parker and Florence are eye fucking each other and really close talking. And her mom says, "I want you gone. You heard me, you little witch." The fight continues, and we get the full of the fight that they had before her mom left, the fight that Jeremiah was telling Kate about. Her mom says to her, "It's you. You are the disease on everything you touch, a little witch seducing men out from underneath of me." She protests. Obviously that's not. And her mom looks at all of the crowd that is now gathering and says, "You'll see. You'll all see. She will curse this town just like she has been a curse on my life." And that, we learn, is the night that her mom disappeared or was murdered by Parker. I'm just saying. Could have been murdered by Parker. So we're back to the current day, and she walks around the corner to an accented voice saying, "You handled that well." And she puts together that Cade was the one who was at the club, the one who gave her confession at Notre Dame, or the little version of Notre Dame that exists in this town festival I wrote, not the actual cathedral. And they are talking about, they're talking about Florence, and he's like, Amaya's like, "You could just forgive her of her sins." Anyway, and Amaya swoons. She swoons. And he asks about Quentin, and she tells him a little bit about him, and Cade leads down to talk to him. Doing very well, I might add. At the beginning of this, when I hate Cade, I will give him 100%. He knows how to deal with Quinn very well. He does excellent. So she loves how he reacts, and she begins to feel grateful and then upset because she feels so emotional at someone treating Quinn with bare minimum kindness because nobody else does. He then brings up that he didn't see her at Mass, and she thinks about how he's very intimidating for a priest, and he insists she come to Mass next week while slightly gripping her arm tightly. Next, we're at Cade, and he is thinking about how he hasn't done much for the parish since arriving because the only thing he's done is follow her around and be a stalker and think about her. And he's upset that she didn't come to Mass when he told her to. And Cade is in Parker's office, and they're talking about the Festival of Fools. He realizes he is here because Parker wants him in his pocket, and Parker calls the Festival of Fools blasphemous. So, a little bit of not in book information. Traditionally, the Festival of Fools was a celebration on January 1st where the peasants would have power for a day. They would choose someone to sit on the throne of the bishop and lord over their people. Such festivals are thought to be a Christian adaptation of the pagan festivals of Saturnalia, which is originally celebrated December 17th. By the 13th century, these feasts had become a burlesque of Christian morality and worship. In spite of repeated prohibitions and penalties imposed by the Council of Basel in 1431, the feast did not die out entirely until the 16th century, according to Britannica.com. So that is the real life, and we are getting an adaptation of Festival of Fools for the book purposes. He tells Parker to let the people have their fun because Parker's like, it's abhorrent. And they have a dick measuring contest. Not literally, but they're arguing about the festival, and that's what I called it. Cade begins to leave, and Amaya enters Parker's office. And Amaya's face changes from shock to confusion when she sees Cade standing in Parker's office. Parker comes to her and tells her she isn't interrupting, and Parker asks if she's met Father Cade. She says that she hasn't, and Cade raises an eyebrow at her and says she was supposed to be met Father Cade. Cade raises an eyebrow at her and says she was supposed to be at Mass yesterday, and she bites back. Parker tells her to go sit down, and then he's going to escort Cade out. Cade yells out, Amaya, my door is always open if you need it. He did this because he remembered her comment about her paying her debts, making her feel dirtier than being a stripper ever could, and now she's walking into Parker's office for something, and he knows that Parker is a shit human being. And so, while still in Cade's POV, we don't learn about what happened in this meeting, and then he stalks her home again. Next chapter, we're still Cade. We open on him talking to his superior, Bishop Lamont, about how he wants the church to participate in the Festival Fuel. Why can I not say this word today? Festival of Fools. And Bishop Lamont's like, why? And he states that Parker wants it stopped. So he tells Bishop Lamont that he thinks that the church should be involved. Otherwise, it's just the people making a mockery of the church. The bishop reluctantly, very reluctantly agrees because Bishop Lamont is in Parker's pocket and states that he wants Cade to work with Parker and not cause problems, to which Cade is like, fuck you, bro. Jeremiah walks in when he gets off the phone, and he and Jeremiah talk about how the church could enter into the Festival of Fools and how they could help. And they talk about how the elementary school does a play every year, so maybe the church could be involved in that. So he goes to talk to the principal of the elementary school. And he realizes that she, the Principal Lee, I think is her name, she's unimportant, we don't like her, is on a power trip, and he hates how holier than thou she is about absolutely everybody. So he hears something in the hall, and he sees Quinn being harassed by some of the bigger boys, and he asks Principal Lee who that is, and she tells him, that that is Flo's kid and Quinn, and he asks her, is this common? And she's like, what is? And he says, for you to allow children to behave in this way. And she says, boys will be boys, you know how it goes. And I want to stab myself in the face. And I wrote, and I just threw up in my mouth. So he asks if Amaya knows that her brother is being bullied. And she acts like being bullied is the wildest thing he could have said. Like children should be acting that way towards each other. And then she just proceeds to talk shit about Amaya. So that's super fun. Next chapter, we're Amaya, and she's at the club again. She's thinking about Father Cade, and she realizes, oh my god, I have a crush on a priest, and this is not okay. What the fuck is wrong with me? And at this point, I'm trying to decide if Parker is going to be the Claude character, or if Father Cade is supposed to be like a hot Claude character. And at this point, I have finished this book by now, and I still don't know. I think that they're both supposed to just have a little bit of him in them. So Father Cade gets Principal Lee to agree that Quinn can participate in the play that they are going to have. And so Principal Lee leaves a voicemail on Amaya's phone asking her to come in and sign a permission slip because practice will be happening off campus. So at this point, I'm listening to it, and she's talking about her feelings about the festival, and she's walking down the hallway in the school. And I look at my husband. I'm sitting over on the end of my couch, and he's sitting on the other side. And I was working on my script and listening to the book while he's watching something on TV, and I'm like, oh my god, I know where this is going. And I had to take a pause, and he just kind of looks at me weird. So I was like, at this point, when Principal Lee agreed to let Quinn enter into the play, as the like outcast boy that he is, it dawned on me that Quinn, as the boy with ASD, is going to be the Quasimodo of this story. That's who he's supposed to be. It dawned on me at this point. And if you've never seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, they do like a little play thing. He joins with the Romani people, the gypsies, in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then the people boo him and they throw stuff at him. And it's really awful to watch on The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And at this point in the book, I was like, if she goes full Quasimodo on this boy, I will riot. So my exact words were, if the people in the crowd are going to throw things at him like they do in the movie, that would be terrible because he is a boy, but also the implications of him being autistic in this book and being compared or paralleled to the awful things that people yell and shout at Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's what I wrote. I may riot if that's how this book continues. I was so afraid that that was where this book was going. And I'm not saying that Emily McIntire would write something like that, but I'm just saying, like, if you're going to go full Hunchback of Notre Dame, that's what happens to Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I was really afraid for this boy who was on the spectrum to have to deal with that. So back to the book. She dislikes walking down these halls because it makes her feel how she felt terrible in school. And like, same bro, I feel that way walking down the halls of the high school that I graduated in for events for my cousins because I currently don't have any children. Not that my children, non-existent, if that ever happened, wouldn't also go to the school. They probably would. But I did not want to graduate from the school that I graduated from for many reasons, but walking down the halls of that school, I feel exposed and weird. I don't like it. So I understand. She spots Cade talking to the principal, and he says, "We meet again. God surely has me in his favor." And she asks if he's stalking her, and he responds, "And what if I am?" She says, "It's probably a waste of your time. I don't live a very interesting life." And he says, "You are the interest," and tries to convince her to go to church again, and she feels all kinds of things you shouldn't feel about a priest. She then says, "After losing my virginity to Parker, when he first came back around after my mom left and I dared say no, she has had no sex drive." And after being like, I know where this book is going, then this happened. I shut my computer and I turned the book off because I just stared at my husband and I was like, first of all, my girl, that was rape and it was not your fault. And I had lots of feelings. I spent a whole day where I didn't touch this book. I didn't pick it up on my Kindle. I didn't pick it up on my phone. I just let it be because I needed to work out how I felt about that. Because, wow, I didn't think talking about it on here was going to do this. That's the way that she views that situation. Like she's making it her fault, which it is not. It is not her fault. It is nobody's fault when someone who is awful takes advantage of you and assaults you. It's never your fault. It is their fault. It is the person who did that. Okay, we're back. Principal Lee is shitty to Amaya and questions her about being a practicing Catholic because of the familiarity between her and Father Cade. She's like, I didn't know that you were Catholic. And Amaya's like, I didn't know that I needed to be Catholic to speak to the priest. And this is where Amaya learns that it was Father Cade who wanted Quinn to be in the play. And she has many thoughts about that. Next chapter is Father Cade. When we open on this chapter, Cade admits that he feels ownership over Amaya, but he's still conflicted about killing her and thinking that he should also stop wanting her because that makes it complicated. So he's making hot chocolate, which makes him think of being a young man and how sweets and hot drinks is what the priest gained his trust with as a street kid. Kate has a flashback memory of stalking a ritzy group of people headed for the cathedral. Why I decided to describe them as a ritzy group of women, not people, is weird, but He jumps in front of them and speaks French at them. They're like American. And he falls into the woman and picks her pocket and runs away. Voices are shouting after him, and he gets caught by the Archbishop, who steers Cade to a cafe and orders them some chocolate crepes. And he begins to ask Cade's name. And then he asks him back every single day to feed him. And that is how he gained Cade's loyalty and trust. Trust is the word I was looking for. So Cade's thinking about Amaya, and he's thinking that Amaya is a test to his devotion to God, and how he can balance the monster to how he can balance what the monster wants with his faith. And he's having a hard time to reconcile the feelings he has for Amaya versus what his faith requires him as a priest. And immediately after thinking these things, his cottage door receives a knock, and he opens it, and there is Amaya. And he says the look of her smile makes it hard to breathe, and he calls her little sinner in French again, petite pécheur. I'm sure I'm not saying that right, but we're gonna go with it. I was like, not gonna lie, I would be swooning at the French, lol. He is full of turmoil and thinking about how her entering his cottage is going to etch her existence into his home, a place that has been free of her before. Amaya said she didn't needed to think, and she ended up here. He asks what she needs to think about that she couldn't think about at home. And she has been thinking all day about coming to thank him for getting the school to include Quinn in the play. And he compares her to a little doe standing before a predator. Okay, Twilight, calm down. Next chapter is Amaya. The next night, Amaya goes to his house again, and he's in sweats. And she's like, God damn, that is a hot fucking priest. Not looking anything like a priest. She admits that she didn't look up what he's calling her in French, like, because it's a plausible deniability thing. She doesn't want to know, because she's like, what if it's awful and horrible, and then it taints the way that I'm lusting after this super hot 36-year-old priest. Because at this point she's like 21 and he's 36, which is not a huge age gap, and I find that acceptable-ish. This is coming from someone who was in a relationship with someone who is 10 years older than me. Not now. I have previously been. My husband is only 2 years older than me. So she's looking at his bookshelf, and she feels his breath on the back of her neck. And he asks if she found something she liked. And she questions his alchemy book and says, because, he's a priest, and he says he likes to have knowledge of all disciplines. And I'm like, okay, that goes against being a priest, my guy. And she gets all, oh my God, don't fuck this priest. That's too far of a boundary to cross. And a stray strand of hair falls into his face, and she reaches for him, and he like jerks back and is like, we should not be touching. She asks why, and he says, I think you know why. Way to give away that you are also secretly lusting for her. I swear to God, Cat, if you knock this, he's just like bobbing and weaving through tables and shit. Leave the cat alone, please. Thank you. But then the next second, he's touching her face and calling her beautiful. And she says, you have to say that because you're a priest. And he's like, I shouldn't say that because I'm a priest. She calls him father to remind herself who he is, but he says Cade. And she says, what? And he says, you may call me Cade. Scene switch, and Dahlia is expressing her dislike that Quinn is going to be in the play for the festival due to the fact that the Festival of Fools is ableist. I was like, and side note, she's making shells and cheese, and now I want some. I did, in fact, come home and make myself shells and cheese after I read her making shells and cheese. She yells at Dahlia, and they talk it out. And she says, it sucks to know that you have the best kid in the world and can't protect him from the ugliness of the world, which is the worst. And next chapter is Amaya, and she's at the club. Her regular Andrew is there. He is the wedding ring guy from earlier. And she's like, normally he's a very grabby person, but tonight something is off. Quote, but tonight before things even get started, I can tell something is not quite right. There's a glaze to his eyes that isn't normally there. His pupils blown like he snorted a whole 8-ball up his nose, but I need the money, so I ignore it. And I was like, foreshadowing, question mark, question mark. Amaya's stuck in her own head, and she's having a lot of trouble slipping into her Esmeralda persona. And he begins to get more forceful. And she needs to go somewhere else in her head, and of course she goes to Cade, which is not smart, so she's pretending that Andrew is him. And she's getting all hot and bothered all horned up, my guy, until he speaks. Andrew speaks to her, and then she panics because she's like, why am she's like, she's giving him a good dance. Like, she's super into it because she's imagining that she's doing this to Cade. And then Andrew talks and she's like, what the fuck? And she jumps up and she panics and runs down the hall. Like, he chases her down the hall and she runs out the side door and he grabs her and is like, you forgot your money. And then he like slams her into the outer wall of the building. And of course, it makes her think of when Parker assaulted her. But then there's like a loud crack sound in the distance, and they both stop and look, and she runs. She books it. She makes it to the bus stop full of people to get away from Andrew. So, of course, Cade is the loud crack sound that we heard, and we are now in Cade's POV. Next chapter. We get him thinking about all of the rage that he had as a child. And he was, of course, stalking her, so he was at the club, and he gets mad at the visual of her getting aroused while rubbing on Andrew, even though we as the readers know that he is the person that she was thinking of while she was getting aroused all over Andrew. And he's trying to come up with reasons that he can kill Andrew. In his, I'm still a priest, I need valid reasons for the monster to kill someone. Like, I need him to be a sinner. He slams Andrew against the wall, holding him by the throat, like with his forearm, and then like with his other hand. So he's got him like this against the wall, and then his other hand, he like reaches down, like twists his balls. It's really great. Cade tells him he will die tonight as he lets him go, and he puts a scarf in his mouth to keep him quiet. And then he like mild bone breaking torture ensues until he hears voices. So he pulls the scarf from his mouth and uses it to strangle him. And of course, because it's Cade, his cock gets hard while he's killing him. So he's also a sadist. Amaya, next chapter. Quinn is having time with one of his therapists and her phone rings a whole bunch. And she gets home and Dahlia is panicking. And she realizes it's because there is two men standing in her house and they are detectives. And one asks, where were you the 3 nights ago around the time of 1:45? Like in the morning. And she answers at work, to which he asks the chapel in a snarky way. Makes it very clear that he is not okay with sex work. And he thinks, like many people do, that they are lesser society people, which is incorrect. And we hate those people. She says she isn't sure what time she left. It was a hectic night. And he says, was it? And she's like, he's like, can anyone corroborate your time frame? And then he is picking at her about the smallness of her apartment, even though she probably makes good money at the chapel. Like, why do you live in such a shitty tiny apartment if you make good money at the chapel? Okay, and then he presses about Andrew. And she says he's come into the club, and then he presses when she admits sometimes she dances for Andrew. And he says your boss Philip said that you were his favorite and that when he was there, no one else could ever get anywhere near you because he had such an obsession with you. And she asks them to leave, and Detective Fuller says, unfortunately, it's not that simple. You see, Miss Paquette, Andrew Gleason is dead, and you were the last person he was seen with. So the next chapter is Amaya again, and she's thinking about how Andrew is dead, and she isn't torn up over it, and she sometimes wonders if there's something wrong with her, because when it comes to death, everybody else seems to grow sick with grief, and she is just kind of like, meh. Her exact words are, but my insides stay a steady numb slate, like a hard drive that's been wiped down. But also, my girl, your mom was extremely horrible to you, and you have massive amounts of trauma that would cause you to shut down. The cops do the, do you want a drink? You seem nervous thing. Quote, you seem nervous, Fuller notes, slinking across the table and tapping his fingers on the metal top. You guys really aren't forthcoming with information, and this feels very aggressive. Wouldn't you be nervous? And he shrugs it off as if he was being, as if she wasn't innocent. She says, I am innocent. I snap back before the weight of his statement sinks in. Wait, am I a suspect? Was he murdered? My lungs clamp down in tight panic. They have a little more back and forth, and then she lawyers up. And of course, fucking Flo walks in. Flo is the court-appointed, you wanted a lawyer, here's your fucking lawyer. And Amaya's like, hell no, bitch, I want a different lawyer. Get the fuck out. And Flo's like, it's me or no one. And then she goads her about Parker and the fact that she works at the chapel, and Flo threatens Q, and Amaya storms. She looks at the detective and is like, am I under arrest? And he's like, no. And she's like, I'm fucking out. Peace out, bitches. I'm gone. And she leaves. Cade, next chapter. Cade gets a knock on the door, and it's Amaya on the other side, and he looks at her wide eyes and red-rimmed eyes, and her hair is a tangled mess, and he steps towards her, soothing her by saying her name. They have a back and forth about how she shouldn't be there, and she has no one else. And he reaches out to grab her hand. Of course, because it's Cade, he thinks about how he could snap her in half because she is so small and so delicate. And then he shoves her away, thinking she's going to step closer to him. And then he snaps at her, and she tries to leave. This is a direct read. She spins around, and before she can make it far, I'm on her, my front flush to her back as I press her into the wall next to the door. Her body tenses against me, and I bring my arms up, caging her in, aching to touch her with every fiber of my being. My breath makes the strands of her hair flutter. Why am I being so what? Petite Pisher. Pesheress? Pesheress? I don't know. Petite Pisher. And so she whispers, you've never been this mean to me before. And I wrote, oh my, because then he is like pulling her against him so that she can feel how hard he is. And he says, do you see what you've done? What you've reduced me to? I thrust my hips against her, my eyes rolling as my hand slides up the front of her stomach and over her chest, resting on top of her heart. And then he is fingering her, super naughty priest, and they both pop, even though she's not touching him, but he hasn't had sex maybe ever in his entire life. So he's feeling all up in her, and they both pop, and he immediately is like, get the fuck out. I point my finger at her. Firstly, don't point your bitch ass finger at me. If I was her, I'd be like, no. But continuing, he says, so he goes, I point my finger at her. Don't point your bitch ass finger at me. Are nothing more than a temptress, a witch sent to lead me astray, just like your mother said, which low blow, dude. Bring up her probably dead mother, I wrote, because I'm convinced still at this point that her mother is dead. More about how she is the problem and not the fact that he swore celibacy to Sky Daddy like he isn't a human being and it's fucking stupid to be celibate. Anyway, then he calls her worse than a whore. You are the devil. Fucking prick. Anyway, Amaya, next chapter. She is wallowing in bed and Dahlia won't let her. Like days wallowing in bed. They have a serious convo about her predicament. We get a chapter break and we have selling my soul feels different than I thought it would. So her predicament about her being a suspect for the cops. And now selling my soul feels different than I thought it would. Now, before I turn this page, I wrote down that I was going to predict. So at this point, we are now to page 21 of my notes. I was then reading my book with my eyeballs because I hate Cade's voice. And from the point that I stopped listening to the book, I actually was quite into Father Cade. So before I turned the page, I was predicting that she was going to Parker and was going to agree to be with him to get out of her situation. And I was right. She tells him everything. She admits that she's been working at the chapel, that a regular got too bold and ended up dead. And then she says, yes, I will marry you. And I wrote, stupid bitch. I mean, it's not her fault. I get it. Next chapter, still Amaya meeting a lawyer Parker is paying for named Josh or Jacob or something like that. We'll figure it out later. He immediately shuts down the idea of her working at the chapel ever again. And she is now afraid to tell Dahlia what he planned. And he then tells her, you're tainted goods now. In fact, I'm not even sure why I'm still going through with it. The board of Aaron Enterprises, which his name is Parker Aaron, won't like that you're on my arm. It'll be bad for business when it comes out that a stripper who murdered a man is the one wearing my ring. So 1 page ago, he was telling her that the new lawyer would handle everything, that there's no way she could have killed Andrew because of how small and blah, blah, blah she is. Also, her being a stripper is the best way for her to pay her bills, and he demanded her bills and the money that he demanded for her. And I wrote, God, I hate him so much, and I hope Cade kills him. Don't get me wrong. I hate Cade, but I think I hate Parker more. And I stand by that I hate Parker more. I no longer, at the point of finishing this book, hate Cade. She goes to her apartment and tells Dahlia, and Dahlia's like, okay, which leads to Amaya basically trying to get Dahlia to talk her out of doing this thing and like marrying him. But Dahlia's like, it's the best option for you right now, bro. And if it's a mistake, I'll be here for you. But mistakes have to be made, my guy. So it's up to you. Next chapter, Cade fantasizing about Amaya and how she has a tangible want now that he has had his fingers buried inside of her. How he stalked her some more and then whipped himself until he passed out. And now he's at the back at the monastery to see Sister Genevieve. Maybe now we will find out. Maybe now we will find out the secret I think she's holding. We don't. There is no ginormous, like, she's not hiding. I was convinced that she was hiding a person in this fucking monastery. She's not. He says that he chose to come here because there is darkness in her just like in him. The pain is becoming too much to bear, and he needs someone to care for the wounds so they don't get infected. He can't go to a hospital or anything like that because people will talk, so he came here. He shows her, and she says, don't sit down. Your bleeding will stay in the funeral? Furniture. Your bleeding will stay in the furniture. And she returns with things to clean his wounds. So she cleans his wounds, gets them all bandaged up. He leaves. She does tell him at this point, maybe you should take a break from all the punishment, my guy. Everybody sins. It's just the way of it. God forgives all, blah, blah, blah. He leaves and he finds an email from the bishop telling him to rehabilitate the reputation of Parker's new bride before their wedding here at the Catholic Church. And he is shocked when Amaya arrives to his church office with Parker. She glares at Cade, and he says it makes dopamine flood my system, happy to have her attention when she's here with someone else. Parker squeezes Amaya's leg, and he thinks about killing him. And he thinks, I could tie him to a chair, break his fingers, and then fuck Amaya in front of him, smearing her thighs with my cum to make sure that Parker knows who Amaya belongs to. Except, no, she doesn't, my guy. You are literally a celibate priest. Next chapter. Amaya. Cade says they can't have the wedding too soon because she's not ready for a Catholic marriage. And Parker's like, but I'm Catholic. It wouldn't be right to have it anywhere else. So Bishop Lamont said she could take courses. And Amaya argues that she was raised Catholic, and Cade ignores her, but aims his next words at her. Excellent. So it's settled, Parker says, not bothering to look at Cade or me. I need to get back to work. You two can start right now. So finally, Cade breaks the silence, alone at last, his voice smooth as butter, and it pisses me off. Unfortunately for me, I snark. He smirks for both of us, actually, but let's not waste time pretending you don't enjoy our alone time, Amaya, when we both remember how much you do. I sit forward in my chair, pointing my finger at him. You don't get to do that. You don't get to stand there and act like what we did was fine, like what you said. I cut myself off, not wanting to finish the sentence because it doesn't matter, and me showing my emotions like this makes me feel out of control, and I hate it. He tilts his head. You do realize there's no divorce in the Catholic Church, yes? I lift my chin defiantly. And do you often let other men touch you when you're spoken for? Yes. And she says, do you often touch women when you are? Because he is spoken for by God. I retort, pointedly looking at the clerical collar that's wrapped around his neck. He says, a mistake I won't be making again. I don't know why that statement stings, but it does. It's not like I want things to happen again. I cross my arms and his gaze flicks down to my chest. My eyes are up here, Father. So they're arguing, and she sits forward, and their bodies are almost touching. And he's like, you should go before I do something that we both regret. And she does. She escapes. Next chapter, Cade, he's thinking about being a child and wondering what it was about him that made the sister want to beat him more than the other children. And he does nothing for 2 days, but actually his job, aka being a priest, he does not follow Amaya. He does not stalk her anywhere. But the monster grows stronger in the dark. And so on the coldest night of the year, he leaves on a mission. So he heads to her apartment and he hides between the bushes, but like kind of in front of them, looking into her window. And he expects to wait for her to arrive home from work, but he realizes that she is not at work. She is there. He obviously hasn't put two and two together that Parker's not going to want her dancing for other men at this point. And she's in a towel, and she drops her towel, and she moves like walking around, and he tries to get closer, but the bush jostles, and she looks up, and her gaze snaps to the window, and she looks directly into his eyeballs, and he's like, "Oh shit." Next chapter is Amaya. She knows it's him. She thinks I should be revolted, disgusted, freaked out, screaming from the rooftops and calling the cops, but I'm not. And she proceeds to touch herself while staring at him through the window, who he also proceeds to do the same thing. And she has her standing ovation with her eyes closed, and she looks up and he's gone. Next morning, she's trying to come to terms with the fact that she is not crazy and she did, in fact, see him outside of her window and what they did. She decides that next time she sees Cade, she'll pretend like nothing is different, that nothing happened. And she spends her days with Quinn, watching the news, or with Jason the lawyer, waiting to find out if they are coming after her for Andrew's murder. And then at night, she sits and waits to see if Cade will show up, and he always does, watching her while she does what she does, and he does what he does. Sunday morning, Parker demands she be ready to go to church. She puts on the most modest thing she owns and gets into the town car he sent. Parker says some shitty things to her about the way that she looks, and then he places a giant diamond ring on her finger, and into church they go. Next chapter is Cade, and he sees Amaya appear, and he stumbles over his words as he watches her slip her hand into Parker's. Sermon is done. Time for communion. By the time she and Parker reach me, my head throbs and my mind is in a daze, furious that she's infected even the most sacred of ceremonies with her presence. Maybe her not showing up before now was a gift, keeping me from this endless cycle of torture. Parker bows his head as he stands in front of me, but suddenly it's not enough. Kneel, child. My voice booms. He snaps his gaze up, glancing around when the silence lingers, just long enough to be uncomfortable. I lift a brow, and slowly he kneels. I lift the host, the body of Christ. Whoa, I snapped forward. He kneels, Amaya fidgets behind him. I lift the host, the body of Christ. Amen, he replies, opening his mouth. My lips twitch at seeing him so submissive at my feet, and he finishes his communion before jumping to his feet quickly, cutting me a vicious glare before returning to his pew, and then it's Amaya's turn. It's glorious. The rest of church happens. Next day, they have a meeting. She walks in looking hot as shit. He says, I see Parker wasted no time in dressing up his new doll. I sneer. She glares at me, closing the door, shaking her head. You must be the worst priest in the history of the Catholic Church, she says, and they have an argumentative conversation, which ends in him saying, we are impossible. And he does a nice thing and offers for her to bring her normal clothes to change into so that she's comfortable and not in whatever Parker wants her to be in. They argue some more and they agree to be friends, and then they have an actual conversation. And then Parker busts in when their session is 10 minutes past due. Like it's 10 minutes ago they were supposed to be done. And he takes her to his penthouse, lets her use the town car where she goes to get Quinn and take him to therapy. And they grab breakfast and head for the chapel for Festival of Fools play practice. She tries to find a window to peek in so she can see how Quinn is doing. And Cade appears and asks if she is peeping in windows, and then they flirt about how he is the one peeping. And they're standing extremely close together, and then someone walks around the corner. Next chapter, Cade. Cade is thinking about trying to get transferred out of here so that he can be away from temptation, yet he still went to her work and to her place all the time. The person who walked around the corner is, of course, our bestie Flo, who touches Cade's arm like a creeper, like touches his arm and turns to Amaya and says, sad to hear I was taken off your defense. And Cade's like spine straightens and he's like, what defense could she be talking about? Cade and Flo both look at Amaya's hand and see the ring. And Flo smirks and says, I see you've grown resourceful. Who's the unfortunate guy? And he feels super jelly because Amaya puts on airs for Flo. And she pretends to be all happy that it's Parker. Okay, so she puts on airs and she says, oh, didn't you know? Amaya says sweetly, a sugary sweet grin taking over her face. I'm marrying Parker. Florence's mouth pops open, her eyes widen in alarm. My Parker? I cock my head. Interesting. Amaya's eyes sparkle. The one and only. I know you had a thing for him once upon a time, so no hard feelings, I hope. And I need to inform everybody, because I don't think we talked about it, because nobody gives a shit about Flo. Flo is married and has a child. And she is not married to Parker. We'll just say that. So they have that spat, and Amaya walks away, and Cade asks Flo what she meant about Amaya's defense, and she's like, I can't say anything. I'm a lawyer, like attorney-client privilege. I could get in trouble. And he's like, consider this a confession. And so she tells him she murdered Andrew Gleason, and Cade is shocked because, of course, he knows, and we know, that he murdered Andrew Gleason. But he also was not aware that Amaya was going to be their prime suspect, and he is putting all of these things together that a few nights ago when she showed up at his house all upset, and he threw her out, and the next day she was engaged, it's because she needed help because she was the prime suspect in Andrew's murder, and he threw her out. And regret swims through my veins like poison. She came to me first, and I turned her away. Next chapter, Amaya. She's in a room with lawyer Jason. Jason's his name. Parker and Cade, for some reason, is there, and they're watching the TV, and the news that Andrew has been murdered has now been leaked. Someone brings up that Candace's murder at the beginning of the book seems very similar. They were both strangled. We're not even going to go there. Asphyxiated? Maybe? My mouth doesn't like to do words. And that maybe they have a serial killer, and the panic Amaya feels is palpable. And Jason and Parker both talk around her, even as she's asking them things, when Cade says to turn off the TV. Then I said, turn it off, Cade demands. The temperature in the room drops, the cold slicing through the air like a knife, dragging across my skin. The way both of you sit here and are willfully ignorant to how badly she wishes to be anywhere else, Cade hisses, throwing a hand towards me. She can hardly sit still, and you both speak above her as though she can't hear. Like it isn't her life on the line. It's despicable. And Parker asks for alone time with her, and he tells her how she will never get away from him now that he has her, and she tries to de-escalate his situation, and he subtly, very subtly, hi, sweet boy, threatens Dahlia, please don't lick my leg, that's gross, and Mom gets the itchies. This chapter ends with her swallowing back her nausea and smiling at Parker to appease him. Next chapter is Cade watching her pack through her window, more internal monologue about how torn he is and nonsense and nonsense about Parker. Things get weird then because she walks up to the window and slides her finger beneath the straps of her nightgown and lets it drop to the ground, so close to the window that her nips be touching the glass. And he's thinking about all the stuff that he wants from her, but this tight, neither of them touch themselves. She puts a few fingers to the glass, and he also touches the glass, and they stay like that for a little while until she gets into bed. Then Cade comes up with a batshit plan. He goes to another window of the apartment and prays that it's Dahlia's and not Quinn's, but doesn't actually check, and throws a small piece of concrete through it and runs away. That's step 1 of his plan. Step 2 is find someone else to murder, in the exact same way that he murdered Andrew and Candace. All of this is so that when the next murder is connected to the others, Amaya has an alibi to clear her name. So, like, he's going to break the glass. They're going to call the cops. The cops will be with Amaya when the next murder happens. So then she can be like, I was with the cops when this other murder happened. I clearly didn't murder the other two because this one was murdered in the same way. So this whole plan is concocted so that she doesn't have to marry Parker, since he thinks the only reason she went through and agreed to this is so that she could have good money for lawyers to protect herself via her not being in jail to protect Quinn. Which is true. But he also doesn't know how fucking psychotic Parker is, and that she can't just escape Parker. Next chapter, Amaya. She admits to herself that she was comforted by Cade being at her window. She did not tell the cops that she thought it was Cade who broke the window because she does think that it's Cade. And she thinks, what kind of person is half in love with their stalker? The same type of person who lets a priest pin her against a wall and fuck her with his fingers, I guess. But I mean, girl, he's a hot priest, so don't feel so bad. And she didn't tell him to stick his fingers in her pants. He did that all on his own. He wanted to get a feel of what she had going on downstairs. She finally tells Quinn that they're moving in with Parker, and he takes it pretty well. His routine being thrown off could cause a behavior, but so many things have changed lately for him. And they head off to school, and she goes to a studio owned by her boss, who owns the strip club, even though she hasn't shown it up in weeks. And Dahlia's like, my guy, you have got to tell him that you're not working for him anymore. And she's like, I think he gets the point because I haven't been to work in weeks. But if I call him and I talk to him about it, is he going to take away the studio? And this is the only thing I have for myself. So she goes and does her dance workout, and then Dahlia calls her and tells her to come home and to call Parker because they found another body. Next chapter is Cade. The body hits the news immediately, and they're calling him the Green Mountain Strangler. He's talking himself out of going to see if she's okay, but she shows up anyway, much to his little priest in training's dismay. He covers priest in training being Jeremiah. He covers her being there by saying Parker wants the training sessions. But then they go to his cabin, and he gets her all flustered. Next chapter is Amaya, still in the same scene, but switched into her head, and she is questioning his involvement in her head. So she's like, there was another murder. I say, watching him carefully. Did you know? Question mark. He nods. I did. Did you care? It's a far stretch to think he had anything to do with this, but my intuition is strong, and it's never steered me wrong. I'm still debating on whether the idea horrifies me or fascinates me. Is it too crazy to think that Cade could be the reason behind all this? He has a tendency to follow me, and there have been numerous times around him when I felt my hair stand on end and the red flags wave, warning me I was in danger. Was he also at the chapel that night with Andrew? But then I think of Candace also having the strangulation marks. And it just doesn't add up. It couldn't be him, unless Candace was a fluke. Maybe I'm connecting the dots when there's nothing to connect. But in some sick, twisted way, the thought of Cade being the one to murder the man who assaulted me and then killing another to clear my name is exhilarating. Nobody has ever protected me in that way. And then he's like, where did you just go? And she's like, I was just thinking, I guess. He asks if she's still going to marry Parker, and she says he wouldn't let her go, even if she didn't want to marry him. And Cade steps towards her, and she stops him. And then the teapot whistles and brings them back to reality. And she asks him, what do you do at night? And he quirks a brow. I can't move my eyebrow. I don't have control of my eyebrows like that. I wish I did. Anyway. And he says, I think you know what I do at night. And she asks if they're ever going to talk about things. And he says, I'd rather not. She says, fine. Well, I meant after that thing we're definitely not talking about. Actually, after that last specific time we're not talking about, where were you? And he says, here, obviously, where else would I be? And her response is, I don't know what you do with your time. Out of the two of us, I'm not the one with the habit of stalking. And he laughs. And as they leave, she tells him she's moving in with Parker tomorrow. So next chapter is Cade, and he's like, OMG, I have to go look in her window one last time. She's moving in with Parker tomorrow. He gets there, and he taps on the window, because now they're both aware that they're both aware of him staring at her and doing the thing. And she opens the window when he taps on it. Opens it wide enough for him to like slide on in, and then she shuts the window and the blinds, and they stand there. And Cade says, we both know what this is. This is goodbye. This is goodbye, and that's why when she steps into me, her breasts grazing my body, I shake my head and move out of reach. I cannot touch her. If I do, I'll never recover. I won't be able to leave her or this town. And then he, in French, says, let me see you. I have never known greater torture than staying rooted in my place, knowing I could have her if only I'd reach out and decide to take it. My gloved finger slips beneath the strap of her tank top, and my stomach cramps from wanting to feel her skin so badly. The thin fabric falls off her shoulder, and I follow it with my finger tracing down her arm, soaking in the way goosebumps sprout in the wake of my touch. And then he calls her Magnifique, and he tells her to strip for him, and her eyes flare, and she lifts her hand, removing the strap from her other shoulder until it falls down. And he says, I could so he's staring at her boobs, and he's like, I could cup them in my hands, slip between them, and feel the heat of her skin as I fuck her cleavage and spray cum across her chest. My abs tighten. I need you to promise me something, I say. Her hand moves over the fabric of her shirt, slipping beneath it and flicking away until her breasts are revealed one painstakingly inch at a time. And he says, do not let me fuck you tonight. And she starts to say his name, and he says, I can't, Amaya. I won't survive it if you do. I won't survive you if I do. And then she says, "Why did you come?" And he says, "I wanted to see you one last time." And then he said, "Show me how you wish to be touched, I plead. Show me what I'm giving up." And my God, does she ever. So it happens. And then he, in French, whispers in her ear, "You are mine throughout all of our lives." And I'm melting. Next chapter, Amaya. We open on the next morning, and her and Dahlia are saying goodbye and getting in the car to deliver her to Parker. They talk about the dead people and if she knows any more about her being a suspect, and then they arrive to Parker's. Next chapter, Cade. He's back at the monastery having Sister Genevieve apply salve to his back again, and they talk about how matters of the heart are nothing compared to him, capital H, him, aka God. And then he leaves. We get some time passage, and now he is getting ready for Christmas Mass. He looks and finally sees her, his stomach twisting. He thinks he wants to rip the new emerald necklace Parker got her off of her neck and shove it down his throat. 2 days later, he's walking by practice and notices Quentin off by himself, so he goes to him, and Quinn says, "I'll stay out of the way over here." Then he asks if Quinn likes it to be out of the way and over here, and he says no. And it's very obvious that it is not Quinn's idea to stay out of the way. So Cade asks if he would like to go to his office, and he says yes. So next chapter, Amaya, we open up on her stretching, thinking about Cade, and she almost says his name out loud. She's laying in bed. Sorry, she's laying in bed stretching. She almost says his name out loud, and then Parker talks in her ear. Thank God she didn't say Cade's name out loud, because then that would be awkward. And Parker's a psychopath. So he says they have a meeting with Jason now, but Parker tells her that she is free, and he comes onto her and then threatens that she needs to pay up for all that he's given her and soon, which is gross, but that means she has not currently had sex with Parker. So she goes to the church to pick up Quinn, and she finds out that Cade took him sometime during rehearsal, and his look after person gets scolded by Amaya, and she storms to his office, and then all anger leaves her when she sees them sitting on the floor finger painting. Lydia, who is his overseer, takes Quinn to go get cleaned up. Read. "You really have some fucking nerve," I spit, moving toward him and shoving him in the chest. He stumbles back slightly. "Excuse me?" I step forward again, jamming my finger in his chest. "How fucking dare you? What was this, some master plan to soften me up and get me back in your life?" His eyes grow sad. "Amaya, no." I jab him again. "This isn't fair, Cade. I can't have you, you know? We aren't good for each other. And here you are, sitting in your office, looking like that," I gesture up and down his body, "and being the way you are with Quinn. And I'm supposed to what? Forget about everything else?" He shakes his head. "I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth," I yell. "How about you try the truth for once? Tell me why Quinn was in here with you, and then tell me who you really are, because you're sure as hell not a holy man." And he chuckles, and he says, "Here's the truth. You're delusional." And then he calls her ungrateful, and she says, "Don't tell me I'm ungrateful, you fake." And then he tells her that she is infuriating. He goes, "You think this isn't real?" He grips my hand and pulls it down until it's covering his hard cock, and I bite the inside of my cheek to keep from moaning. And she says, "Fuck you." I rip my hand away, squirming in his hold. And he says, "I thought you wanted the truth, Amaya. How about some more?" He leans his teeth nipping at my jaw. Goosebumps sprinkle across my neck, shoulders rippling down my spine. "You pretend to hate me because it makes it easy. You come in here with anger as your shield, striking out before you get struck yourself." And she tells him no. And he says, "But nothing about us is easy. And the only one in this room who's faking anything is you." And she's like, "I just want it to stop. I want to be able to exist without you plaguing every single one of my thoughts. I feel sick and obsessed. Please, Cade." And so, like a tear leaks out of her eye. And this man licks the tear from her cheek. I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for that, my guy. Whew. And so then they start making out, and like he slams her into his desk, and they're groping, and they're like pulling at each other, and then there's laughter outside the door, and they pull apart. And he said, "This was an inevitability. We are an inevitability." And she says, "It can't happen again." And Cade says, "Because you are Parker's." And she responds, because you are God's. So next chapter is Cade, and he's still thinking about Amaya, and he thinks now that the only thing that feels right is her. He says, I still have my faith, and I still believe in what I preach in his word, but for the life of me, I can't reconcile the pain I feel inside at not being able to have her as long as I serve him. It doesn't seem fair. I don't like being angry with God. This is my one last chance at one last attempt at clinging to my righteousness, to what I've always believed to be so. I pray and I beg for guidance, but just like before, there's only silence in return. So towards the end of this book, obviously we are getting him having like a religious crisis because he wants to be with her and he can't, according to what he believes in. So he's checking on things for the setup for the festival when he sees the town car pull up. After Quinn gets out, he follows her to the studio and sneaks in the door, and he's watching her dance. She finishes her dance and then she sees him. Chapter switch, same scene, Amaya. I felt him before I knew he was here. That sounds silly, but it's the truth, which is a thing for certain people in real life. So, like, I have a person that if they were to walk into my house and I did not hear them, I would know that they were in my house. Just because I can sense it. There is staring, and he locks the door, and she thinks we're not supposed to be. The thought propels me into action because if this is our moment, I'm going to grab onto it with both hands. And then she's touching him on the outside of his clothes, and the music's still softly thumping in the background. And then they get all kinds of wonderfully freaky. Oh my God. They do it. They finally actually have sex. And it is glorious. It's glorious. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to leave that scene for you to read through, though, because it's wonderful. So the chapter ends with, he's right, our love hurts so much more. So she's like, it hurts to not be with you. And he's like, being with you hurts more. My love for you hurts me more. And I feel that, my guy, because that person that I can also sense when they enter a room, like, that's why I chose my husband, because loving my husband doesn't hurt me like loving other people in the past has. Amaya, next chapter, they got it on, and before he left, they got it on again. And she is now back at home at Parker's, and she has concealer on her neck, and her clothes are covering every possible inch of her body because Cade was like kissing and biting on her neck, and like his fingers, he grabbed her so tightly because the need was so much that there's bruises all over her body from where his fingers were. It's wonderful. And they're having dinner, and he's being super cagey, asking her about how her day was. And she's like, it was good. Fine. How was your day? And he says it was illuminating. And he has decided that they will move up the wedding date. And I panicked. As soon as he said it was illuminating, I was like, fuck, he was there. He saw it. He knows. So, next chapter. Cade, he's at home using discipline on himself again because, he definitely broke all the vows that he has. The biggest vow of his being celibacy, broke that. So the next day he is taking confessions, thinking about Amaya, and then she rushes in and asks asks him, is it you who killed those people? And he asks if she hates him, and she says, no, I'm in love with you. So he's like, come with me. So next chapter is Amaya. She follows him back to his cottage, and they fuck some more, which is not smart because Parker is clearly suspicious of you. How do you know he's not currently following you or having someone in the church watch you? Anyway, so they're in bed, and Cade rolls over, and she sees the marks on his back. She says to him, you said you'd never hurt me. I murmured into his skin. Never again. Every time you hurt yourself. Oh, gross, gross, gross. Oh, yes. Okay. Bleh. There are things that make me happy, and there are things that make me want to die. So she sees the marks on his back. And she says to him, you said you'd never hurt me. I murmur into his skin, and he says, never again. She says, every time you hurt yourself, you hurt me too. I whisper, please stop hurting me. Just no. The answer to talking to someone like that is just no. I have been the him in this situation and had someone look at me and tell me, please stop hurting me because me hurting myself was hurting them. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Amaya, we're not doing that. Cade, Amaya, no. No, we're not doing that. Hi, my boy. Sorry, mom almost keeps hitting you in the face. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. Next morning, Parker calls her into his office and asks her to sign their marriage license. And she asks, shouldn't they wait until the wedding? And he says, do you really believe I haven't known every step you've made since you and your whore mother stepped foot into my town? I am the god of the city, and you should be fucking honored. Whoa, my guy. Uh, that I decided to let you be mine, and yet you mock me. Sneaking around like a filthy little slut, and you think I wouldn't know? I have eyes and ears everywhere, sweet girl, even in Coddington Heights, which is the other town where her dance studio is, where the chapel was, where she fucked Cade in her workout studio. He said, if you don't sign it, I'll go to the church and I'll find that blasphemous priest of yours and I'll string him up in front of you while I cut his cock off and make him choke on it. Gross. And then he tells her, you are not to see him again. Next chapter, Amaya again. It is now, we have skipped time. It is now January 1st, and today is the day of the Festival of Fools. And they're in front of Notre Dame, and Parker has his arm around her all possessively, and she says it makes her want to strip her skin off entirely. And at this point, I'm hoping the book ends with Cade killing Parker. Like, I want Cade to kill Parker, and I want her and Cade and Quinn to ride off into the sunset. So we get a beautiful description of the festival. It's wonderful. It sounds magnificent. And they're sitting in the very front row in front of the church for the play. And she is trying her hardest to not look anywhere but straight at the stage because she doesn't want to see Cade because Parker was like, you're not to see him again. And we find out that Parker has also been abusing her. Um, and so she finally sees Cade and her side hurts where Parker kicked her in her ribs. And Parker leans in and says, you better stop looking at him or I'll be forced to make a scene. And then the play starts and the play happens. And then Quinn wasn't in it. And the moment I feared begins to happen. Ish. The moment I feared begins to happen. Ish. Flo, the bitch, Flo, crowns Quinn King Fool. And the crowd kind of murmurs and laughs at him. Nobody throws anything at him, and Quinn is not aware of what is happening. But Amaya is, and Dahlia, who's sitting next to her, is, and she sees red. She's like, I'm going to fucking murder everybody. So she tells Dahlia, grab Quinn and get him the fuck out of here. And so she gets up and she takes off, and she sees Dahlia snatch Quinn off the stage, and then she takes off after Florence. She follows her into the bathroom, and she slaps her across the face. And oh my God, I love it. You fucking bitch, my voice echoes off the tile, and she halts from where she was leaning over the sink to look in the mirror. Oh, please get over yourself, she rolls her eyes. That was cruel, and he may not know it, but I do. In years now, he'll look back and he'll remember. She huffs out a laugh. Don't be so dramatic, Amaya. It was just a little fun. I step forward slowly, a sense of anticipation thrumming in my veins, and I whip my hand out and smack her across the face so hard she stumbles into the counter, her head flung to the side. She sucks in a breath. You're such trash, Amaya Paquette. You're trash, your brother is trash, and your little slut of a friend, Dahlia, is trash. I point at her, my fingers shaking. Shut your fucking mouth. I'm not saying anything that isn't true. Even your own mother knew it. Why do you think she's not around? I lose all sense, reaching out, swiping the metal tissue dispenser that's sitting on the sink. I don't even register the weight as I grab it and slam it down on her head. Yes, Queen, do it. All the violence. And then Kate is grabbing her and pulling her away. Next chapter, we're in Kate's POV. Calm down, petite pêcheresse. And calm down, petite pêcheur. I whisper in her ear. He gets her outside and asks where Quinn is, and she tells him she saw Dahlia grab him, and he says, good. He puts her inside of his car, which, like I said before, he has a car. Why was he taking the bus anyway? He buckles her in, and he says, listen to me. I'm taking you away from here. Do you understand? Do you trust me? She nods, and he gets in and drives out of there. He takes her to the Green Mountain Monastery. She looks up at him and says, I'm not sorry for hurting her. It felt good. And he's like, hell yeah, bitch. So he takes her to the sanctuary and to the bathroom suite and gets her all cleaned up, and she tells him she didn't want to do it, and he knows that she's talking about Parker, and his rage pounds in his ears, and he gets her all settled in bed, and she falls asleep from all of the emotions and adrenaline. So he goes downstairs and he runs into Sister Genevieve and he asks her to look after his friend while he's gone. And he tells her, if something happens to her while I'm gone, I will make the devil look like a saint. Next chapter is Amaya. She takes a shower and then she wanders downstairs after she wakes up. She takes a shower and she wanders downstairs and she's getting a drink and the floor creaks behind her. She says, I grab a glass and I spin around, my heart jumping into my throat. The glass in my hand drops to the ground and shatters, slicing up my ankles and pooling at my feet. But I don't feel the sting. The woman's eyes grow wide and she stumbles back, a hand flying to her chest. Amaya, she whispers, blood draining from my face. My mouth drops open and I blink in disbelief because standing right in front of me is my mother. Cue video of me reading this happening because, so cue the video. Okay, we're back. Oh my god. I thought her mother was fucking dead. I thought Parker killed her mother, and you cannot. Her mother was in a monastery an hour away from the city this whole time. Her shitty piece of shit mother was a freaking nun now. She went and was absolved of her sins by freaking God and just lived an hour away in solitude. Like her. What the fuck? Anyway, next chapter, Cade. He goes to Dahlia's, and unfortunately, he finds her very gruesomely murdered. R.I.P. Dahlia. We love her. So he does what priests do, and he reads her last rites over her body. And Quentin is not there, so he heads to his cottage. And fucking Parker is at his cottage, and he's sitting in the darkened kitchen, all creepy like. And Cade hears dinos. So that's a thing that, like, I mean, I didn't get into it, but like the first time that Cade talks to Parker in the editing Shay here, I realized that I said Parker, but what I actually meant was Quinn. The first time he talked to Quinn in the supermarket. The supermarket, after she has that run in with Flo, they talk about dinosaurs. So every time every time Quinn sees Cade, he says dinos at him because that's how his little brain remembers him. So he sees Quentin sitting in the corner unharmed on the floor with his light up headphones on his head watching his tablet. And he says, Bonjour, mon petit. Bonjour, mon petit. I coo, flashing Quentin a smile, my eyes scanning his body to ensure he's in one piece. Parker, I keep my eyes on Quentin. Let me take the boy away. Parker says no, and then Cade asks if he is there to kill him. And Parker responds, that depends on what you've done with my wife. And Cade grins at him and says, which time? My guy. So at this point, obviously, I am no longer hate Cade. As soon as I switched to my reading it, I did not hate him anymore. So Parker lunges forward and he yells, you motherfucker, I want you gone. You will tell Bishop Lamont you're leaving, or I swear that mythical figure you pray to that I'll blow your brains out all over this kitchen floor. And Parker reaches for the gun that's sitting on the table, but Cade is longer and faster, and he grabs the gun and grabs the gun with one hand, hauls Parker across the table with the other, slams him down on the ground, his hand around Parker's throat. Quentin's like, wide eyes, tablet still playing in his ears. He can't hear what's happening, but he can obviously see what's happening in front of him. And he calls him mon petit again, and he tells him to go down the hall to his room, and he will get him a dinosaur, and that they can finger paint soon. And it takes some convincing. Quentin does this thing when he gets overstimulated and or freaked out where he rocks back and forth, and he does eventually stop rocking. And Quentin agrees to go to his room. So Cade proceeds to torture Parker once Quentin is safe and out of the way. And I really hope that the lighting on this is not getting worse now that the day is changing from day to afternoon, evening-ish. Parker is like, she is my wife and mine to do with what I want. And I already filed the papers. And Cade says, but did you have her sign a prenup? And of course he didn't, because he is too cocky and he thought there is no need to have her sign a prenup because she will never escape me. And Cade says to him, she may be your wife, but she is my soul. And I will cut you up piece by piece and burn your empire until it's set, just so I can watch her be the queen of ashes. There's nothing I love more than someone being like, I'm going to make you the queen of ashes. Fuck yes, you are. Fuck yes, you are my guy. Do it. So, Back to Amaya. We're in her head, and she is freaking out. Her and her mom are having a back and forth. And her mom is like, God forgives all. And me and Kate are super close. He probably trusts me more than anyone else in the world. And Amaya tells her, if I asked him to kill you, he would do it without blinking. And Chantal scoffs. He's a priest, child, please. Nope, I shake my head. He's mine. Chantal responds with still the same delusional little Amaya with bigger dreams than you have tits. Now imagine that coming out of the mouth of a nun. So Amaya asks if she missed her at all, and Chantal says no. Fuck that bitch. And then she proceeds to try to ask about Quinn, and Amaya loses her shit, as I would, and she leaps across the table. Why is everybody going across tables? Leaps across the table, takes her to the ground, climbs on top of her, and backhands her across the face, saying, Don't you say his name. And then she strangles her mom to death. I'm down. I'm down with the plan. So they're in the kitchen, and then she hears the door fly open from down the hall, and it's Cade and Quentin. So she runs out there and she stops Quinn from exploring, and Cade asks if she's all right, and she said, I did something bad, and I need your help to clean it up. And so she sends she sends Quinn upstairs, and she follows him upstairs. And when she comes back down 30 minutes later, Quinn is upstairs, and he is handled, and Cade dealt with Sister Genevieve, and then the next morning, Cade tells her about Dahlia and she asks if he made Parker's death hurt, and he says yes, and her response is good, because bitch, same. Okay, same morning, next chapter is Cade's point of view. And he's like, I gotta go deal with some shit. I'll be back. So he goes and he threatens Florence that he will show tapes of her and Parker getting it on that he had of them together, and he'll show her husband, and he'll tell her husband that their child is in fact Parker's and not his. So if she doesn't help him. So she agrees, and there's a press release 3 days later where Detective Fuller announces that they were able to connect the Green Mountain Strangler to Parker. That according to Flo, he was obsessed with his wife Amaya long before she agreed to be his. They explain away all the murders, and Flo says Parker followed her in a rage and beat her to a pulp in the bathroom, aka what Amaya actually did. And Cade, when he was checking on Dahlia and found her dead, he did in fact see Parker's cufflink, which fell off of his sleeve when he brutalized Dahlia. He left that next to he left the cufflink of Parker's there because it said PE on it, which is Parker Aaron. And so he left it there, and that was all the proof they needed to believe it. So epilogue, Cade tells us that for the first year after this happened, we are now 5 years later. For the first year after the news broke about Parker, they traveled. And then he brought her to the mountains in France to settle, and that Quentin took the change very well and blossomed in a way that he never could have in Festivale. And Amaya found him the best play therapist because he reacts better to play therapy. And that he is homeschooled now with a small group of other children similar to him who have similar needs. And that on this night, he is spending the night with one of his friends, and they were just married in a small outdoor cemetery. Cemetery? No, that's a me thing. I would do that. They were just married in a small outdoor ceremony while Quinn is off and on his own. And then we switch back to Amaya's perspective, and they get to live happily ever after. He leaves the priesthood so that they can be together. They move back to France. They're all happy. Everything is sunshine and rainbows. And I enjoyed this book after I stopped listening to it on audio. That was the problem. So that might be the problem too for you. But I no longer hate Cade. And I get it. I get it. I get why he was the way he was when we started this book. I recommend 10 out of 10 this book for anybody who can deal with some dark themes, aka the murder stuff. The slight torture that happens that Cade does to Andrew Gleason and things like that, those happen on page. So I guess I should have added on page torture to the trigger warnings. But it was a wonderful book, and thank you, Emily McIntire, for bringing these wonderful stories to life and for me to feel all of these things. Thank you for being here, and make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel and click the bell button so that you can be notified every time that I post a video. And I hope to see you guys again next time. Bye.